Welcome to our World Christianity Seminar here in the room and online. My name is Jörg Haustein. I'm Associate Professor of World Christianity here in the faculty. And it's always a pleasure to coordinate together with the Center for World Christianity, the Cambridge Center for Christianity Worldwide, the seminar series. And it's a great pleasure to welcome today Dr. Gina Zurlo, who is a scholar of the history of mission and world Christianity. She got her PhD with a study of a great Anglican number cruncher, David Barrett, at Boston University under the supervision of Dana Roberts. And then she also came to go to where the numbers are together with Todd Johnson. She's co-director of the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Cornwall Theological Seminary, as well as a visiting research fellow at Boston University's Institute on Culture, Religion, and World Affairs, founded by Peter Berger. Now, for us in the room, it's perhaps also interesting that she was named in 2019 as one of the BBC's 100 most influential and inspiring women for her work in the study of religious statistics, and in particular, the future of the female future of religion worldwide. Now, I know Gina mostly as a number cruncher, who's displayed remarkable patience with my critical inquiries about how you count Pentecostals. And I'm not familiar with this side of your work on women and world Christianity. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say to us today and what you want to tell us about this particular part of your research with the title, Women in World Christianity, Facts, Figures, Challenges, and Opportunities. Welcome, Gina, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me at the seminar today. I woke up this morning and I said, I ought to be in Cambridge. Next time we're going to do this in person. Zoom is great, but I want to be able to have coffee with you all afterwards. So next time, hopefully in person. But I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to both all of you in person and those who are joining us on Zoom about my latest research on women in world Christianity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project that I did, some findings, and then some other kind of those challenges and opportunities that women are facing in Christianity all around the world today. And the thing I like to start with when I discuss this subject is one of the most famous things about world Christianity studies, right, is the shift of Christianity from the global north to the global south. In many ways, the whole field is somewhat predicated on this reality that now we have more Christians living in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania than we do Europe and North America. And the thing that we don't always hear about that shift is that there would be no shift of Christianity to the global south as we know it without women. Christianity spread throughout the world by indigenous Bible women who brought the gospel to their communities, passed it on to their children. Church history is full of nuns, martyrs, queens, mystics, pastors' wives, mothers, single and female missionaries, teachers, nurses, indigenous evangelists, Bible women, and all just kinds of regular, normal women who helped spread the faith from where they were to elsewhere in the world through their local grassroots communities. And so I think we need a recentering of how we understand the shift of Christianity to the global south by centering women's experiences and not leaving them on the margins. And the other assumption that I'm going into this work with is that life is gendered and church life is gendered. Men and women experience the world differently, and men and women experience Christianity differently. And so that's part of the motivation for this research, is to untangle what that really means. How are men and women experiencing Christianity differently, and then placing women's experiences in the center. So what you're going to hear today is from my forthcoming book on the subject, Women in World Christianity, Building and Sustaining a Global Movement. It comes out in just a few months through Wiley-Blackwell. I'm actually in the throes of proofing and indexing as we speak, so the book is almost finished. And this book takes a continental approach to women in world Christianity with a chapter on each of the continents, and then a traditions approach, a chapter on Catholic women, Orthodox women, so on and so forth. and then select topics. I chose individual chapters on gender-based violence, ecology, theological education, and peace building. And depending on how things go time-wise today, we'll get into some of those topics. So there have been many, many things along the way of my scholarly journey that have pointed me towards this project. And one of them was the United Nations Human Development Report in 2019. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I love when the UN Human Development Reports come out. And so in January in 2019, I was really excited to wake up and read the new Human Development Report. And one of the chapters was about gender equality. And it said this: nowhere in the world have women attained complete equality with men. Nowhere. Nowhere in the world. I thought, well, that's a rather startling statement. How could that possibly be? It goes on to say, if current progress continues, it will take 202 years for women to be fully equal. That was a rather shocking number, 202 years. So not in my lifetime or my kids' lifetime or my grandkids' lifetime are we going to see complete equality between men and women. And they said that one of the reasons for this is that progress on gender equality is slowing down as women attain some of that low-hanging fruit markers of progress, like primary education. So yes, more women and girls are receiving education than they have before. Fewer women are dying in childbirth. More women have greater earning potential than they did in the past. And that's all good. And a lot of progress has been made. But what this report is saying is that some of those more difficult achievements, like women in governmental participation in politics, women as CEOs, women with PhDs, all those kind of harder things to attain, are somewhat out of reach still for women around the world. And one of the things that they said in this report that I thought was really striking and had application to Christianity was this: beliefs about what others do and what others think a person in some group should do, maintained by social approval and disapproval, guide actions in social settings. So what it's saying is what people think others should do. So what people think women should do is maintained by this social force to keep those gendered expectations as they are. And it's saying, unless the active barriers posed by biased beliefs and practices that sustain persistent gender inequalities are addressed, progress towards equality will be far harder in the foreseeable future. So they're saying, unless you directly challenge those active barriers, we are not going to see progress in this area. And when I read this, the first thing I thought of, naturally, was Christianity. What active barriers exist in churches, in Christian theology, in Christian societies, Christian organizations that keep women in a certain place? My own personal experience, what I've read about church history and about Christianity around the world, we know that there are gendered roles in Christianity. We know there are gendered expectations in this religion. So what are those active barriers? How are they being maintained by social approval and disapproval? And who is trying to cut through those active barriers? So another piece of this is the famous, I'm going to call it famous, the famous article by Dana Robert in the International Bulletin of Mission Research in 2006 called World Christianity as a Women's Movement, where she asked the question, what would the study of Christianity in Africa, Asia, and Latin America look like if scholars put women into the center of their research, not the periphery, or as a lot of people have done, not at all. And so she made two arguments in this article, which I highly recommend you read if you can get access to it. The first is, she says, world Christianity is majority female. And the second thing she said was there are gender-based reasons for conversion. So she takes all these examples throughout church history and gives evidence for the different reasons why men versus women convert. Conversion is gendered. There are different reasons why men or women join churches. Now, this first point, of course, is most interesting to me. World Christianity is majority female. And the thing she said in the article in 2006 was this: there's no data. No data. She said there was no quantitative data on women in world Christianity to back up her observations about Christianity's gendered makeup. And of course, when I encountered this as the student of David Barrett, Todd Johnson, I thought, surely there must be data somewhere. Surely there's got to be quantitative data somewhere on this. And if there isn't any, I'm going to go find some. So that is what launched the Women in World Christianity Project, funded by the Louisville Institute and the Religious Research Association, which produced the first ever data set on gender in every Christian denomination in every country of the world. So we're going to look at some data. We're going to look at some nuances to that data, some problems with the data, a bit about what women do in churches, and then some of those challenges. So there were three aspects to the Women in World Christianity Project. The first was a massive literature review. What are women doing? What are they finding? And then this percent female assessment of every Christian denomination in the world. And the reason I went to that level is because as editor of the World Christian Database, we maintain a database of every Christian denomination in every country. And I thought, oh, we'll just go in and apply a percent Christian female to our existing data. And then I attempted a global survey of what women are doing in churches to get at that social norms and attitudes part of it. What are men's and women's attitudes towards gender, and what men and women can and can't do in congregational life? So those were the three aspects of the project. And I'll start with our first major finding, which is not really a finding because this is what everyone has, quote, known about Christianity for a long, long time. Christianity is majority female everywhere in the world. Christianity is indeed a woman's movement, not just because they make up the majority of church congregations pretty much everywhere in the world, but they're also the most active members and are utterly critical for continuing the Christian faith into the future. And as a side note, all the photos of women that you see in this presentation are actual Christian women from places around the world, not just stock photos of random people. This is the human face of statistics. These are real people, real women doing real things in their communities. On every continent, church affiliation is more female than the general population. And overall, my research showed that global Christianity is 52% female. And so the Pew Research Center in 2016 did a study of gender and religion and also found that world Christianity was 52% female. So in that sense, my study replicated that of Pew's to show this slight majority. Now, as a side note, an important side note, is what I'm measuring here is membership and affiliation, not who goes to church, right? Not who believes in God, not who, I don't know, prays every day or any other measure of religiosity. I'm looking at membership and affiliation. So here on this map, you can see, for example, that North America as a whole is 51% female, just the general population, but the Christian population, North America, is 54% female. And so you might be looking at this data and think, wow, she did like several years of research to uncover a 2% more majority in world Christianity. That is not very interesting. And I will agree with you. This is not very interesting data. This just shows a very slight majority over the general population. So let's keep going. Hang tight. It's going to get more interesting, I promise. Generally, the countries with the most Christians, and so that list there on the side, those are the top 10 countries with the most Christians, report a higher percent Christian female than the general population, but again, only by super slim margins. So for example, Brazil's population is 51% female, but the Brazilian census reports that Christians are 52% female. This is not very interesting either. Where is the interesting data? Let's keep going. The countries in my analysis that report the highest percent Christian female are all over the world. So that top 10 list there, those are the countries that had the highest percent Christian female according to official census data in their countries. And the top three were all 63%, Mongolia, Israel, and Estonia. It's not that these three countries have anything in common with each other, of course, they just all happen to report 63% female. And so a methodological note here is these data come from census information. And I'll talk about a little bit why that is important. When you look at official data released by governments on religion in their country, this is where you get just these very slight margins between the population and the Christian population. So far, you are not impressed, and neither am I, and that's totally fine. Where it gets more interesting is this. There is a chronic lack of data on gender in world Christianity. That is one of the major findings of this project. I spent years trying to uncover the best data sources for gender in Christian denominations and networks and all other kinds of organizations. And as I said, I started this project because I had just come off of 5 years of research and writing for the World Christian Encyclopedia, which contains demographic information on every denomination in every country of the world. And so I thought to myself, I'll just go back to all of that data that we collected from religious communities themselves and reanalyze it through a gender lens, because Christian denominations and communities are collecting all kinds of information all the time. They can tell you how many pastors and how much they get paid and how many buildings they have and how many children get baptized and all other kinds of things. And I thought, surely they're reporting on what % female their membership is, but they're not. They're just not. Turns out this whole thing from one perspective was doomed before I even began. I really thought the project was dead before it even got going, once I realized that this lack of data is there. So either groups that do collect really good quantitative data on their members are not asking about gender, or they're asking and they're not reporting it. And so this is a major gap that is happening in world Christianity. And without good data, we really cannot have a complete understanding of an organization nor its mission. And you can't make good decisions about the health and well-being of all of its members if you don't understand or aren't aware of a very basic demographic fact. I mean, sex distributions is the basis demographically. This is not complex. And in theory, it's pretty easy to collect. Okay, so what did I find? We found that when you nuance the data, when you look at more localized qualitative studies of Christian communities around the world, you get a different picture than that of what emerged at that 30,000-foot view trying to collect quantitative data. So consider Africa. One of the most common refrains about African Christianity is that the church is majority female. You tell anyone who knows anything about African Christianity that my study found that African Christianity was 52% female, and they will laugh at you. And I can say that with confidence because it has happened to me, where African scholars have literally laughed at me at the notion that African Christianity is only 52% female. Everyone knows that African Christianity is a women's movement. So an example of this is recently I was giving a similar talk at a Doctor of Ministry seminar here on campus, and there was a Nigerian Anglican bishop in the room, and I gave my whole spiel, and he said, you know, if anyone in Nigeria tells you that his church is majority male, he's lying. That's just the reality of Christianity in Africa. And so here are some studies that I use to kind of get at this. So here's an example from the Catholic Church in Benin. This respondent said, women are very active in the church. Women are the majority and church attendance everywhere. Women do everything. Coming to church, you will find out that the population of women is greater. Women could be about 80%, while men would be something like 20% in attendance. 80-20, that's a lot more than 52. On Brazilian Pentecostalism in Mozambique, these are from the literature review I did. These are not my respondents, but from other studies I looked at. Based on field work, it is possible to affirm that nearly 75% of the visitors and converts at Brazilian Pentecostal churches in Maputo are women of varying age. Mozambique, Brazilian Pentecostalism appears to be a very female-oriented religion as compared to Catholic and Protestant mission churches, where I often count that women make up about 60% of the visitors and men 40%. Here's a couple more. On the International Center for Evangelism in Burkina Faso, 90% of their church members are women. And not only does this person make a quantitative statement, they make a qualitative statement, and they are far more dynamic than the men. On Pentecostalism in Zambia, also indicating that it is majority female, as well as African Protestantism in general, majority female. And it's not just Africa, of course, Asia. Protestantism in Korea is majority female. For example, the Presbyterian Church in Korea, Tonghap, is the 4th largest denomination in the country, and it's 70% female. One of the most well-known things about the Chinese house church movement in the 20th century is that it was majority female, and in some areas, Protestant communities were 94% women. And a very famous 2007 survey of religion in China reported Protestantism in China was 72% female and 27% male. Okay, so these figures are pretty astounding, but the problem is this level of detail doesn't exist for most places in the world. It only exists in places where people have done that on-the-ground ethnographic qualitative work to come up with figures like this and ask people on the ground. Now, for me, as a globalist working on every denomination, every country, it's very hard to get that level of detail for all of the groups that I'm reporting on. And so I'm actually going to start a second round of the Women in World Christianity Project starting in August of this year to get at this gap. There's a massive gap between membership, which tends to show gender parity, and participation, where women are far outpacing the men in terms of commitment, in terms of participation, attendance, all kinds of things. So now that I've done this base level research and kind of see where the problems are, I'm going to try to fill those gaps and come up with a better data set that shows more of the on-the-ground reality, where we think 2/3, maybe 3/4 of Christians in the world are active female members. So 3 general trends emerged from the data. So the first is a data source issue. And that was that surveys reported a higher percent Christian female than censuses. So if you look at, for example, the Brazilian census, as we mentioned, said that Christians in Brazil were 52% female. But in neighboring Argentina has a very good social scientific survey program where they've asked about religious affiliation over 2 rounds of the survey. And the survey data from Argentina shows much higher rates of female membership than men based on the survey data. So there's something to be said about how the questions are being asked between the census and the survey. Another finding was that independent denominations report a higher percent Christian female than Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant denominations. So independents are Christians who do not self-identify as Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestants. And there are some examples here: the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, Jehovah's Witnesses, Church of the Lord Prayer Fellowship, that's an AIC, the Assemblies of God, Zimbabwe. So all of these groups kind of fall in the independent category, and they are reporting much higher rates of female affiliation. So there's something to be teased out there. And then the third is one that I said already, is that church membership shows gender parity, but attendance, not even attendance, just participation, commitment is mostly female. Okay, so that's the overview of the quantitative data and what I found from trying to work from that 30,000-foot view. But what about what women are doing in churches? So let's take it down more to the local level. I administered the Gender and Congregational Life Survey from February 2021 to April 2021, available in 8 languages: English, Chinese, French, German, Korean, Mongolian, Portuguese, and Spanish. Now, this survey was supposed to be administered in person in 2020, at all of the travel and events and everything that I was going to do in 2020. But of course, everyone knows 2020 was a bad year for most things. So that unfortunately didn't happen, and I had to move it all online, which meant my response rates were not what I hoped they would be. But I still think there's something we can glean from this survey. And the biggest thing that I thought was interesting was what I'm identifying as the gap between perception and reality. So we asked respondents about 17 different roles in congregational life and asked 2 questions about them. So the first was, how do you think the chances of women and men compare when it comes to getting a certain position in the church? So not just your church, just in general, what do you think? Is it easier for men or women to attain the position of associate pastor, senior pastor, deacon, administrative assistant, elder, overseer? You can see the list there. And the blue bar is people thought it was easier for men to get that position. The orange is people thought it was easier for women to get that position. And the green thought that it was a pretty much equal chance for both men and women to get that position. So you can see some gendered realities going on here, especially for the senior or head pastor. It's definitely easier for men to get that position than women. But for the most part, I mean, if you look at this, the green is pretty interesting. People kind of think, yeah, okay, it's easier for men, and it's about the same for men and women in most of these positions. But then we asked people who actually holds this position in your congregation. And this is where the gendered realities of church life are on public display. Women appear to most often be serving as administrative assistants, Sunday school teachers of children, and intercessors. Those were the only 3 positions where women were the majority. And this is global. So the blue is male, the orange is female. This is global. When you break this out by continent, in the global south, say, for example, Latin America, the only position that women were the majority was children's Sunday school teacher. And this was not surprising on one hand, given churches I've been in my life, what I know about global Christianity, when I know about the gender dynamics of life, but compared with what people thought was possible, and then what's actually happening, there's clearly a gap somewhere. And it's those social norms and power imbalances that's keeping this gendered reality as it is, even if people believe that it's different. Social norms and power imbalances keep these attitudes going into the future. So let's take a look at a few examples of some of the challenges, some of those social norms and power imbalances that women are facing and overcoming, challenges and opportunities. I have 4 examples, 4 areas here: pastoral leadership, peace building, ecological activism, and theological education. So pastoral leadership, this really only applies to Protestants. I'm not talking about Catholics or Orthodox in this setting. There is a wide theological spectrum regarding women in church leadership, and we're not having the debate here of complementarianism versus egalitarianism. That is not the debate. That's not even discussed really in my book on women in world Christianity, because that's pretty reductionistic, because we're talking about social norms and power imbalances, not necessarily can a woman be a pastor or not. In some places, there's a big push for women in leadership, and in others, not so much. And in places where women cannot obtain these formal pastoral roles, they have found many, many, many other ways to exert influence and witness elsewhere, and sometimes more effectively at the grassroots level than at kind of the main leadership level. If women make up the majority of congregations worldwide, they're going to have influence no matter what, whether they're in the front of the church or elsewhere in the church. But we do know, in many places around the world, cultural factors are keeping women constrained to certain societal spheres, the home or the private space. That's true in a lot of places around the world. And these societal expectations, cultural expectations, and religious Christian expectations keep women from being able to fulfill their ambition in church and the community. So one popular way for, say, evangelicals to think about women in leadership is partnership. There's been a big push in the evangelical world to consider men and women in partnership, to consider them equal, but different in some way, but in partnership. And where the partnership model fails, in my opinion, is where women are considered second-class citizens and biologically inferior to men. That's a really difficult ask for women and men to be in partnership with each other in church settings when culture and society and tradition is telling you that women are less than men. So there's a gap here for sure that needs to be addressed. One of the most encouraging things about the research I've done is I run into so many amazing women who are achieving the firsts in their societies and in their churches. And I have like dozens and dozens and dozens of these, but I want to put their faces and their names and their achievements up here because we know that women face challenges, but for every challenge, there's a woman, there's a community, there's a group of women who are trying to overcome those challenges. And here's just a handful of examples of women who were the first at something. And I can't even imagine what they had to do to overcome the challenges. They had to overcome the scriptural challenges. They had to overcome the challenge of tradition, the challenge of culture, the challenge of social norms and power imbalances to become the first female bishop of the Anglican Communion, to become the first female bishop of the Lutheran Church of Iceland, the first female Anglican bishop in Africa. I mean, this is really astounding that these are happening. To become the first female archbishop of the Anglican Church of Australia, the first bishop of the Philippine Independent Church, the first Assemblies of God pastor in Brazil was ordained in 2020. She's the only one, as far as I can tell. There's one female Assemblies of God pastor in all of Brazil, and Brazil has the largest Assemblies of God church in the world. So there's all kinds of women who are making strides to cut through those barriers that keep them in a certain place. The second topic is peace building. Now, a lot of Christian organizations and missions don't really consider peace building, especially American ones, if I can say that. European ones tend to get it a little more, but the American ones don't really seem to see peace building as an integral part of Christian witness in the world. And one of the things I discuss in my book are the gender dynamics of military conflict and violence. The killing of civilians is generally women and children. Rape and sexual violence are used as tools of warfare. Women and children are the majority of war refugees, and all existing inequalities in a society are magnified when that society is in a time of conflict. And one example of this is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which has been in a near constant state of war and conflict since independence in 1960. And in the DRC, women suffer from a lack of full equality with men. There is high maternal mortality rates and limited health care. And continuous war makes life for women very, very difficult there. The DRC is 95% Christian, by the way. So this is a Christian country by demographic characteristics. But also the DR Congo was described as the rape capital of the world in the year 2010. So any work that's done in the DRC must be intersectional. It has to include peace building efforts. It has to include gender specific training and leadership and theology. It has to include trauma counseling and working with abuse victims. So one of the things that emerges from a study of women in world Christianity is this holism that we are, I hope, familiar with in women in Christianity, women in the missionary movement, that women always had a much more holistic approach to life. That women missionaries, for example, were not just proclaiming the gospel, they were also doing medical work and educating girls and cutting across those gendered barriers. One of the most famous examples of Christian women in peace building is Lema Gwobi in Liberia, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who led an interfaith protest movement to help end the Second Liberian Civil War. It's just the most amazing example. If you have not seen the documentary Pray the Devil Back to Hell, I highly recommend it. But one of the themes from what Lema Gwobi did is the boundary crossing nature of women's work in the world. So this part of the reason why Leigh McWilby was so successful in what she did is because she crossed religious boundaries. Women were crossing religious boundaries. So it was Christians and Muslims working together. And this is one of the themes of women in peace building work, is that their similar situation and circumstances as women unite them across ethnic, linguistic, and religious boundaries. And a lot of research has shown that women tend to be more able and willing to cross boundaries than men. And so a lot of the examples in my book of women in peace building are women coming together, working together for a common cause, girded by their faith, whatever that faith may be, working across a boundary together. The next subject is ecology. And the reason I included ecology in this book is because it's one of the most global issues in our world today. And I think just now, world Christianity studies are beginning to think seriously about what the intersection is between the global climate crisis and communities of faith around the world. I think the evidence for climate change is irrefutable at this point, but what I think doesn't get discussed enough are the gendered dynamics of the climate crisis. Environmental challenges disproportionately impact women, and especially poor women. Men work away from the home, women are caring for small plots of land, and weather events impact those small plots of lands pretty significantly. Women are the main users and carriers of water. So water and water access and water cleanliness is a gendered issue. Women are 14 times more likely to die in a natural disaster than men. And there's been lots of studies about the link between climate change and gender-based violence. So for example, if you have to walk further to get clean water because your current water sources have been damaged in some way, you cannot perform your housely duties as effectively as you might, which could lead to gender-based violence. Generally, however, women are left out of the discussions of climate policies. They lack access of funds for change, and they're not the highest ranks of decision makers, either nationally or internationally. So again, there's a gap between reality and what's necessary. And yet, of course, there are women overcoming these boundaries. Women are victims, but they're also powerful agents of renewal and change. Despite the expected roles placed on women from both Christian and cultural expectations, women around the world are taking the challenge of climate change seriously and acting from their faith to ensure survival for themselves, for their communities. And they're doing it in developing eco-feminist theologies that connect gender, creation, and faith. One of the most famous examples is the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. To do women's theology in Africa is to do eco-theology. They're not separate. We're going to do feminist theology. We're going to do biblical theology. We're going to do eco-theology. No, it's all integrated together because this is what human life is all integrated together. But they're not just doing it as theologians, they're activists. And here's some examples here: Jacqueline Patterson, Evelyn Tucker, Margaret Oluok, Wanjari Maathai, the first woman in East and Central Africa to obtain a PhD, the first African women, and the first environmentalist to win a Nobel Peace Prize from Africa. And the region of the world that feels this most acutely is, of course, the Pacific Islands. And thinking of climate as a world Christianity issue. And world Christianity is all about the interconnectedness of Christian faith around the world, and the fact that what Christians do in one place around the world has some kind of connection to Christians in another place. The climate crisis shows this, I think, better than any other example. So the Pacific Islands generally don't get discussed very much in world Christianity studies because they're very small, the populations are small, they kind of get left off the map. Like whenever you see a map, you literally cannot even see them because of their size. But the Pacific Islands are more Christian percentage-wise than, say, Sub-Saharan Africa. And we talk about Sub-Saharan Africa a lot in world Christianity studies, but we don't talk about the Pacific Islands very much. But the Pacific Islands are experiencing disproportionately the impacts of the global climate crisis based on what large industrialized nations like the USA, China, and India are doing. The USA, of course, being the country with the most Christians, where there is a pretty strong movement of climate denial among Christians. And yet what these Christians are doing in the USA are impacting these Christians here in the Pacific Islands. This is a world Christianity issue. And women from the Pacific Islands are speaking out against it and trying to advocate and trying to bring attention to this issue. My favorite there is Sister Paula Gonzalez, the solar nun. I mean, just look how sweet. Just an amazing woman advocating. She's not Pacific Islander, but just advocating for climate change in her context among her people and making bringing amazing awareness to this issue. The last topic I'll talk about briefly is women in theological education, because there is no global comprehensive data on trends in theological education worldwide, including what share of Christians have formal theological education. And I make sure to state this because we get asked this question a lot at the Center for the Study of Global Christianity. How many Christians around the world have theological education? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. The closest that we came was the World Council of Churches Global Survey on Theological Education, which was from 2011 to 2013. And some important findings did come out of that study, where respondents said the global north has too many schools of theological education, and there's not enough schools in the global south. They found that mainline Christian education was declining and evangelical and Pentecostal theological education was growing. They did say that the number of female students was on the rise everywhere and were outpacing men. And then among the degrees that were popular for both men and women, it was lay training was the thing that people wanted the most. And the thing that I thought was most interesting was that 86% of respondents said that theological education is the most important issue for the future of world Christianity and the mission of the church today. So if this is the most important issue, but we have really no idea how many Christians get theological education, and we have no idea how many women have access to theological education, again, there are massive, massive gaps here. I'm going to skip that table because big tables don't look good on PowerPoint. So one of the challenges for women in theological education is this question of, is theological education designed for women? And especially, is it designed for women of the global south? So Perry Shaw, kind of an expert in theological education, said global higher education in general and theological education in particular has been shaped by empiricist, linear thinking white Western males for empiricist, linear thinking white Western males. So the forms of theological education, especially formal theological education is what I was looking at, don't really appear to be made for women of the global south. So we have to do some thinking about how to make theological education accessible, but also relevant for women around the world. I have some examples here of some regional considerations of the lack of theological education for women around the world. It's really quite recent, the push that exists here. Women were only considered for theological education in Africa after 1989. That's in most of our lifetimes, right? That was not that long ago. In Asia, there was no formal education for women and theological education until the 1970s. In Latin America, we have a lot of Catholic seminaries, but they don't prepare women for the priesthood, so we have low female enrollment, even though Catholic sisters are some of the most, they're doing the most in theological education and education for girls around the world. In Europe, women were 13% of faculty and 34% of graduate students and 42% of undergraduate students at the European Council for Theological Education, pretty low. In North America, the Association of Theological Schools said that women were 36% of enrollment, has gone up, and 26% of faculty, but also most of those faculty are white women, not women of color. And then finally in Oceania, we see similar dynamics. The first debates began in the Pacific Islands, again, only in the 1970s. In the Australian College of Theology, women are 13% of teaching and research staff compared to 45% female in secular universities. So again, there's a gap. And something to think about in theological education are the exportation of Western models of theological education. They just don't fit contexts in other places around the world, especially for women. So yes, world Christianity is a women's movement, but theological education is not a women's movement. Based on available data, women are generally the minority of students, professors, and administrators, and in most cases, women were only permitted to attend these institutions in the last 50 years. In some places, women cannot be full-time students, and they can't take the same classes as men. So while women have made advancements in this area, it still appears to be an upward journey. So I want to end our time this morning before we get to discussion with wisdom from women. Again, one of my favorite things about this project was just being able to hear from women all around the world. So here's Elsa Tamez from Mexico. Women must vehemently reclaim and affirm their right to be considered created in the image and likeness of God. That's the basic. Philomena Mwara from Kenya, the church in Africa has a feminine face and owes much of its tremendous growth to the agency of women. Emmeline Dekoykoi from the Philippines. The main concern of women is not merely a demand for more positions and equal opportunity in decision-making bodies of the church. It is more than that. It is a struggle to recognize women's theological and spiritual contributions as an integral part of the church's prophetic ministry in the world. That's what women are fighting for. And our last one from Amy Francis O in Fiji. The goal is not reverse discrimination, women dominating men, but a new heaven and a new earth taking hold, with no one being dominated or subordinated, each participating according to their gifts in genuine mutuality. That is the vision of women in the world, is being able to exercise their gifts in genuine mutuality. So despite the social norms and power imbalances that render women invisible, they're drawing empowerment from their faith and from their local communities to do the necessary boundary crossing work to demand justice and peace for themselves, for their families, and for their nations. And they're doing this from a basis of faith. So despite the challenges, despite the obstacles, women are creating opportunities for themselves that they've never had before. So here's the contact information for the center is here if you want to reach out to me, or you can go on our website. There's a bunch of free resources there. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and I'd be happy to interact with you more in the Q&A now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gina. That was a fascinating account of and a good mix, I think, of some disturbing statistics, a disturbing lack of statistics,